Tonight, the first topic we explore is the Hagia Sophia, a structure whose very walls echo the rise and fall of three empires. From a Christian basilica to an imperial mosque to a secular museum and back again, this iconic building has survived earthquakes, crusades, and political revolutions. Before we dive in, as always, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you enjoy our content. Let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Sometimes our stories are a bit too fascinating, and we promise we're working on some boring ones too. It's time now to dim the lights, turn on a fan for some soft noise, and let's uncover what we have for tonight, together. It began in the heart of a burning city. In the year 532 AD, Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, was in chaos. Riots known as the Nika Revolt had turned the streets into battlefields. Fires consumed homes, palaces, even churches. Among the ruins stood the remains of an earlier basilica, what was once the Church of Holy Wisdom. But for Emperor Justinian I, the destruction was an opportunity. Where others saw ashes, he saw a blank canvas. He would not simply rebuild a church. He would commission the most magnificent sacred structure the world had ever known. Not as a gesture of grief, but as a declaration of power, of divine favor, of empire. A church that would make even Solomon's temple seem modest by comparison. And so he turned to two men, Anthimus of Talis and Isidore of Myus. Not architects in the modern sense, but a mathematician and a physicist, innovators, visionaries. Together, they imagined a space unlike anything built before. A massive central dome seemingly suspended in air, bathed in natural light, resting on a ring of windows that would make the heavens feel closer. Construction began immediately. Marble came from distant quarries in Egypt and Anatolia. Columns were repurposed from ancient temples. Gold, silver, and precious stones were brought in, not just for beauty, but to impress, to humble, to overwhelm. In just 5 years, a miracle of speed, for such ambition, the Hagia Sophia was completed. On the day of its dedication, Justinian entered with solemn pride. As he walked beneath a vast dome bathed in a golden glow, he whispered words that have echoed through time. "Solomon, I have surpassed you." The Hagia Sophia was more than a church. It was a symbol, a crown atop an empire, a fusion of the divine and the imperial of theology and authority. For the people of Constantinople, it wasn't just a place of worship. It was a wonder, a promise, a reassurance that their city, their empire, was truly chosen. But time would test that promise, because while stone may be strong, history is relentless. Now that it stood, the Hagia Sophia began to breathe. Byzantines didn't merely visit this place. They entered with awe. As you stepped across its marble threshold, the noise of the outside world faded. Inside, the air was cool, thick with incense, and filled with echoes. Echoes of chants in Greek, the shuffle of feet, the soft weeping of pilgrims overwhelmed by what they saw. The dome, nearly 100 feet wide and seemingly weightless, hovered overhead like the sky itself had been brought inside. 40 windows at its base flooded the space with golden light, giving the illusion that the dome floated on air. Light wasn't just decoration, it was theology. To the Byzantines, light was divine, and here it moved like liquid. Everything was deliberate. The marble walls shimmered with veined patterns, greens from Thessaly, purples from Egypt, pinks from Phrygia. The floors were geometric mosaics. The columns, many taken from ancient temples, gave a sense of time folding in on itself. The space felt eternal. It was as if heaven had touched earth. But Hagia Sophia wasn't just a marvel of architecture. It was the epicenter of imperial ceremony. Emperors were crowned here. Patriarchs gave sermons that were both spiritual and political. When a Byzantine ruler stood beneath the dome, he wasn't just a man. He was chosen God's vessel on earth. On feast days, the church came alive. Candles flickered in every corner. Choirs sang with a haunting purity, their voices swirling up into the dome and dissolving in the light. The sacred icons glowed in the candlelight. Christ Panata Theotokos, the saints and angels. Not just paintings, but portals to another realm. To stand in the Hagia Sophia was to feel small, yes, but also held, cradled by something larger than empire, larger than history, something sacred. And for nearly 700 years, this sacred space defined the soul of the Byzantine world. It survived political turmoil, doctrinal disputes, even earthquakes. But while the church endured, the world around it began to shift. And one day, those shifts would reach its doors, not in whispers, but with steel and fire. The year was 1204. The empire that once crowned emperors beneath the Hagia Sophia's dome had grown weary, weakened by intrigue, rivalries, and debt. But no one in Constantinople could have imagined what was coming. They thought the Crusaders were allies. The Fourth Crusade had set out from the west, its mission to reclaim Jerusalem. But what unfolded was not a holy mission. It was a betrayal. Due to a tangle of debts, politics, and broken promises, the Crusaders changed course. They marched not toward the Holy Land, but toward Constantinople. When they reached the city, they didn't kneel in prayer. They scaled the walls. And once inside, they didn't seek salvation. They sought treasure. The sacking of Constantinople was brutal. For 3 days, Crusaders looted, burned, and destroyed. They stormed homes, defiled relics, and took what they could carry: gold, silver, icons, manuscripts. But it was what happened in the Hagia Sophia that broke the city's spirit. This sacred space, this wonder of the Christian world, became a site of desecration. Soldiers rode horses down its marble aisles. They shattered the altar, stole the chalices, and mocked the rituals. A prostitute, it is said, was placed on the patriarch's throne in blasphemous ceremony. Everything that had once made the Hagia Sophia holy, its silence, its sanctity, its awe, was stripped away. Moment by moment, the Crusaders claimed it for themselves. For nearly 60 years, the church was no longer Byzantine. It served the Latin Church under foreign rulers who did not understand its past or care to preserve its meaning. But the Hagia Sophia endured, as it always did. In 1261, the Byzantines retook their city. They re-entered their wounded cathedral, its sacred walls scarred by violence and neglect. Slowly, they began to restore it, not just in stone, but in spirit. The golden mosaics were uncovered. The chants returned, but something had changed. They all huddled beneath the dome, praying, weeping, waiting. Some clung to columns, others sang hymns. The air was heavy with fear and faith. The doors burst open. But instead of ordering its destruction, Mem did something few expected. He entered the church quietly. He looked up at the dome, still catching rays of daylight through its 40 windows. The empire had been humiliated, its trust broken, its jewel defiled. The Hagia Sophia still stood. But now it carried a new shadow, a memory not of glory, but of betrayal. And while it had withstood this storm, the next one would come from the east, and it would not be turned away. The sky above Constantinople was quiet in the spring of 1453, but the ground trembled with the footsteps of an advancing army. Sultan Mehmed II, just 21 years old, had come to claim the city for the Ottoman Empire. He brought with him something the ancient walls had never faced before: gunpowder. Day after day, massive cannons roared against the stone defenses. Smoke blackened the skies. Inside the walls, hope grew thin. And when the final breach came, it came like a flood. The Ottomans poured through the cracks, and the 1,000-year-old city fell. But before the chaos reached its crescendo, many of Constantinople's citizens made their way to the Hagia Sophia. They believed this sacred place would protect them, that its dome, its history, its holiness would be enough. Men, women, children, priests, nobles, they all huddled beneath the dome, praying, weeping, waiting. Some clung to columns, others sang hymns. The air was heavy with fear and faith. The doors burst open. But instead of ordering its destruction, Mem did something few expected. He entered the church quietly. He looked up at the dome, still catching rays of daylight through its 40 windows. And in that moment, history shifted. The young sultan ordered that the Hagia Sophia be preserved, not as a Christian basilica, but as a mosque. It would not be torn down, it would be reborn. He called for prayers to be offered immediately. A Muwan climbed the pulpit, and the first Islamic call to prayer echoed within the walls. The sound was different, new, but the space held it all the same. The mosaics would be covered, the altar removed. A mab would soon point the faithful toward Mecca. Minarets would rise at the corners, tall and slender. But the bones of the church remained untouched. Its soul perhaps simply changed robes. For the Ottomans, this was a moment of triumph, the passing of the world's crown from Rome to Istanbul. For the Byzantines, it was the end of everything. The Hagia Sophia had witnessed coronations, betrayals, and now conquest. It had become something more than a church or a symbol. It had become a mirror of empire itself. Now, under the crescent moon, the Hagia Sophia took on a new life. Sultan Mehmed II, known as the Conqueror, didn't just seize a city. He inherited its soul. And the Hagia Sophia was the most precious of its inheritances. He ordered it to be cleaned, cleared, and sanctified as a mosque. But this transformation was not destruction. It was evolution. Christian relics were respectfully removed. Icons and mosaics depicting human forms were covered with plaster, not smashed. The mikveh, a semicircular niche, was added to indicate the direction of Mecca. A minbar or pulpit was placed for the imam's sermons. The floors were blanketed with carpets, softening the steps of the faithful. Outside, minarets slowly rose like watchtowers, tall, elegant spires from which the call to prayer would sing across the city. The Ottomans knew what they had taken, and they revered it. Mehmed himself prayed in the Hagia Sophia, as would many sultans after him. This mosque was not ordinary, it was imperial. It became a jewel in the crown of the Ottoman world, inspiring generations of architects. Among them was Mimran, a master builder whose very career revolved around understanding, reinforcing, and surpassing Hagia Sophia's genius. Under his care, the structure was strengthened against earthquakes and further beautified with calligraphy, fountains, and tilework. Yet through all this, the building's Christian past was never erased, only quieted. The angels in the dome remained hidden, their wings just beneath the plaster. The Virgin and Child, the Christ Penor, still there, sleeping behind layers of paint and time. Every prayer whispered under the dome added a new thread to an already rich tapestry. The faithful came in droves. Scholars studied in its shadow. The empire's greatest religious festivals took place within its walls. It was a mosque, yes, but also a museum of memory. A place where the voices of different centuries layered atop one another like ancient dust. Through 5 centuries, the Hagia Sophia would stand as the center of Ottoman spiritual life, a space where power knelt before faith and where stone never forgot its own history. Time, as always, tested what men tried to preserve. The Hagia Sophia had stood through war, conquest, and spiritual transformation. But it could not escape the slow and silent tremors beneath its foundation. Istanbul, perched near fault lines, has long been a city that shakes, and when it did, the Hagia Sophia swayed. Its great dome, that architectural miracle suspended high in the air, had collapsed once before, long ago in the days of Justinian. But even under Ottoman rule, the structure groaned. Cracks appeared. Walls shifted. The immense weight of the dome began pressing too heavily on its supports. But the Ottomans were not careless stewards. They understood the building's importance not only as a place of prayer, but as a living monument. And so they called upon their greatest architect. Mimar Khan was more than a builder. He was an artist, an engineer, and a student of history. When he approached the Hagia Sophia, he did so with reverence and precision. He reinforced the dome, thickened its piers, and added buttresses to support its weight, not to change its soul, but to help it survive. He studied its original Byzantine techniques and improved upon them. He didn't erase the past. He stabilized it because understood something few did. The Hagia Sophia wasn't just a structure. It was a conversation across centuries, and it deserved to keep speaking. Through his efforts and those of later restorers, the Hagia Sophia withstood storms, earthquakes, and the wear of daily life. It never fell, and it never stopped drawing eyes upward. Foreign travelers who entered the mosque during the 17th and 18th centuries wrote of their awe. Even after visiting the grand mosques of the Ottoman world, many designed by Sinan himself, they found the Hagia Sophia different, quieter, older, wiser. It had seen so much, carried so many prayers, watched as empires changed names, languages, gods, and still it stood. Cracks may have crept across its dome. The colors may have faded, but the light still filtered down through those 40 windows, just as it had for over 1,000 years. The building remained silent, but never asleep. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world around the Hagia Sophia had changed again. The Ottoman Empire, once vast and powerful, was fading into history. A new nation was rising from its ashes, the Republic of Turkey, and with it came new ideas, new values, and a bold vision for the future. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the founder of this republic, looked at the Hagia Sophia not just as a place of worship, but as a symbol caught between worlds. To him, it represented both the weight of the past and the potential for a new identity. In 1935, he made a radical decision, one that would echo across continents. The Hagia Sophia would become a museum, not a church, not a mosque, but a neutral space. A place where the layers of history could coexist, visible and undisturbed. For the first time in nearly 1,400 years, it would belong to no one faith, but to all of humanity. Restorers began to peel away the layers of plaster that had long hidden the Christian mosaics. Bit by bit, forgotten faces emerged. The Virgin Mary, Christ Pantocrator. The archangels, their expressions soft, almost dreamlike. They had waited patiently in the dark for centuries. And yet the Islamic elements remained too. The great medallions with the names of Allah, the Prophet Muhammad, and the early caliphs still hung high on the walls. The Arabic calligraphy, elegant and flowing, shared space with the golden halos of saints. For visitors, it was unlike anything else in the world. You could stand beneath the dome and see both a cross and a crescent. You could feel the passage of empires in every stone. It was no longer just a sacred space. It had become a mirror reflecting the complexity of belief, power, and memory. Tourists arrived from around the world. Scholars wrote books. Artists found inspiration in its symmetry and its scars. And through it all, the Hagia Sophia stood still, not frozen, but calm, watching, remembering. In silence, it told its story. Not one of division, but of layers. Not of ownership, but of continuity. And for a time, that silence was enough. Silence, though peaceful, never lasts forever. In July of 2020, after decades as a museum, the Hagia Sophia once again stood at the heart of a global conversation. Turkey's highest court ruled that its 1935 conversion into a museum had been unlawful. Within hours, the government announced that the Hagia Sophia would return to its role as a mosque. It was not the first time this space had changed, but the world, now more connected than ever, felt the shift deeply. Some saw it as a revival, a return to tradition, to faith, to history. Others feared it was a retreat from secular ideals, a step backward in a fragile balance between past and present. But the Hagia Sophia, as always, stood quietly at the center, untouched by noise, carrying the weight of both celebration and sorrow. The changes were made with reverence. Large carpets were laid to cover the marble floors during prayer. In that moment, it was not just a mosque, not just a museum, and not just a church. It was all of them, and none of them at once. As night falls over Istanbul and the lights of the city flicker on like stars reborn, the Hagia Sophia still stands unmoved, unshaken, unbroken. It has seen emperors crowned and dynasties fall. The mosaics depicting Christian figures were gently veiled during services using soft, non-damaging methods. No chisels, no paint, just cloth, light, and respect. And when prayers echoed once more beneath the dome, they blended with 1,000 years of memory. The call to prayer rang out from minarets that had watched over the city since the 15th century. Inside, the space filled with breath, with whispers, with devotion. But it did not close its doors. Visitors still came from every country, every background. They marveled at the dome, the mosaics, the calligraphy, the sense of awe that seemed to cling to the air. Whether one came to worship, to admire, or simply to listen, the building welcomed them. Because Hagia Sophia had become more than a place of religion, it had become a symbol of endurance, a structure that had never crumbled, not under siege, not under politics, not under the shifting tides of belief. Its strength was not just architectural, it was spiritual, a resilience not of stone, but of meaning. It has echoed with the songs of choirs, the chants of imams, the gasps of tourists, and the hushed awe of wandering souls. It has held silence when words would not do. It has been sacred to the many, and yet belonged to no one entirely. That is what makes it extraordinary. For over 1,500 years, it has stood at the crossroads of civilizations. Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, Turkish, Christian, and Muslim. East and West. And in every era, it was never just a building. It was a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, victories, and scars of each generation that touched it. Step beneath its dome, and you step into history's bloodstream. You'll feel it in the cool marble under your feet, in the light that spills from high windows like liquid gold, in the quiet breath of space so vast it humbles the heart. You'll feel it in the tension between what is seen and what is hidden. The mosaics asleep behind curtains. The calligraphy still watching from the walls. The Hagia Sophia doesn't speak with words. It speaks with time. It teaches that identity is layered, not fixed. That beauty can be born from both reverence and ruin. That the sacred does not belong to one people or language. It belongs to those who choose to see it. And perhaps that is why it still matters. Because in a world that moves too fast, that forgets too easily, there is comfort in knowing that some things still stand. That the same dome which once looked down on Justinian, Mehmed, Ataturk, and millions of anonymous souls still looks down tonight, unchanged, watching, remembering. It is not just old, it is alive. So as you drift into sleep tonight, imagine standing beneath that dome. No noise, just breath, just light. The Hagia Sophia doesn't ask to be understood, only witnessed and perhaps quietly loved. Charles Darwin was born on February 12, 1809 in Shrewsbury, England, into a family of wealth, intellect, and expectation. His father was a respected doctor. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had already toyed with early ideas of evolution. Ideas, however, that Charles would not yet understand. As a boy, Charles wasn't exceptional by academic standards. In fact, he struggled with traditional schooling. But outside the classroom, among beetles, birds, and bubbling brooks, his curiosity thrived. He collected shells, dissected insects, wondered about fossils. Nature fascinated him far more than Latin grammar ever could. When he was 16, his father sent him to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh, hoping his son would follow in his footsteps. But Charles was uneasy with surgery and bored by lectures. He found more joy attending natural history lectures and joining local scientific societies. Seeing his son's disinterest in medicine, his father then sent him to Cambridge to study for the clergy, a respectable path for a young gentleman. Ironically, it was at Cambridge that Charles deepened his love of science. He collected beetles obsessively and studied natural theology, which tried to explain God through the perfection of nature. But fate, as it often does, would take an unexpected turn. It arrived in the form of a letter offering Charles a place aboard a naval ship about to journey around the world. He wasn't the first choice. He was young, inexperienced, and unsure of himself. But Charles Darwin said yes. That decision, quiet, almost hesitant, would change not only his life, but the entire way we understand life on Earth. In December 1831, the HMS Beagle set sail from Plymouth with a young Charles Darwin aboard as the ship's naturalist. The voyage was meant to last 2 years. It stretched into 5. The Beagle's mission was to chart the coasts of South America. But for Darwin, it became something far more personal, a journey into the unknown corners of nature and of thought. He observed, recorded, and collected specimens with tireless dedication. From barnacles and birds to rocks and fossils, everything fascinated him. He filled notebooks with sketches and thoughts. He sent crates of samples back to England. He watched the land, the creatures, and the people with quiet intensity. South America revealed nature's diversity. In Brazil, he marveled at the rainforest. In Argentina, he studied fossils of massive extinct mammals, strangely similar to modern ones. The patterns whispered questions he couldn't yet answer. And then came the Galapagos. The islands looked barren at first, but they were rich with mystery. Each island had finches, similar yet not quite the same. Tortoises with differently shaped shells. These weren't random differences. They hinted at adaptation, at change, at something far deeper. Darwin collected without fully understanding. He didn't yet know that these birds and beasts would haunt him for years, but they stayed with him in his mind, in his journals. The voyage continued through Tahiti, Australia, and Africa. He encountered earthquakes, volcanoes, and tribal cultures. He saw how nature shaped people, and how people in turn shaped the land. He saw life as connected, not static, but shifting, always responding. When the Beagle finally returned in 1836, Darwin was no longer the same man. He came back not just with collections, but with questions, and the world he thought he knew no longer made perfect sense. When Darwin returned to England in 1836, he was only 27, but already carrying the weight of something profound. His cabinets were full of specimens. His notebooks were dense with observations. But buried among the feathers, bones, and fossils was a question that quietly unsettled him. Why did species vary so slightly from island to island? Why did extinct animals so closely resemble the living ones in the same regions? Most scientists of the time believed that species were fixed, created once, unchanged forever. But Darwin had seen too much. Change was everywhere. Variation was not the exception. It was the rule. Still, he said nothing publicly. For now, he focused on sorting, organizing, and publishing his findings. His work on geology and barnacles earned him respect in scientific circles. He became a quiet, constant presence, not flamboyant, not outspoken, but trusted. And while he wrote about rocks and reefs, a storm was forming in his mind. He began to read widely. One book in particular, an essay on the principle of population by Thomas Malthus, had a profound effect on him. Malthus argued that populations grow faster than resources, leading to competition. Not everyone survives. To Darwin, it clicked. In nature, those individuals with slight advantages, sharper claws, better camouflage, stronger wings, were more likely to survive and reproduce. Over generations, those traits would become common. It was natural selection. The mechanism was so simple, yet so powerful. It explained the diversity of life, the extinction of the unfit, the spread of the adapted. It was a quiet revolution of thought, but it was dangerous to suggest that species, including humans, were not divinely fixed. But shaped by survival and chance was to challenge everything: religion, tradition, identity. So Darwin did not rush. He tested his ideas. He bred pigeons. He studied barnacles for 8 years. He looked for flaws in his own theory, and all the while he kept writing. In secret, he filled notebook after notebook, knowing that if he ever dared to publish, the world would not be kind. Still, the idea grew stronger, and Darwin grew more certain. By the early 1840s, Charles Darwin had a theory that could shake the world. Okay, but instead of rushing to reveal it, he stepped back. He married his cousin, Emma Wedgwood, and they settled into a quiet life at Down House in the English countryside. The world saw a gentle country gentleman, a man who gardened, raised children, and studied barnacles. But behind the calm exterior, Darwin's mind never stopped turning. His health began to fail. He suffered from chronic nausea, fatigue, and mysterious ailments that came and went in waves. Whether the illness was physical, psychological, or both, no one could say. But it kept him close to home and close to his work. From his study at Down House, Darwin continued to observe, experiment, and write. He studied earthworms, weeds, orchids, and pigeon breeding. Every detail of nature mattered. Every small variation offered a clue. He filled journals with thoughts he dared not share. He wrote long essays on his theory, quietly building a case brick by brick, as if constructing a fortress of logic before exposing it to the storm. He told only a few trusted friends, including botanist Joseph Hooker and geologist Charles Lyell. They urged him to publish, but Darwin hesitated. Not out of fear for himself, but out of respect for the world his ideas would disrupt. He loved Emma deeply, and she was devout in her Christian faith. She worried about his salvation. He worried about hurting her. In the meantime, he focused on his family. They had 10 children, though 3 would die young. The grief ran deep. In particular, the death of their beloved daughter Annie, at just 10 years old, shattered Darwin's faith in any benevolent design behind the universe. Still, he did not stop working. He kept refining his theory, gathering evidence, testing its weight. He believed he had found the truth, but he also understood the cost of speaking it. And then one day, a letter arrived. A young naturalist named Alfred Russel Wallace had independently come to the same conclusion Darwin had been developing for decades. Suddenly, time was up. The idea could no longer remain a secret. It was June 1858 when the letter arrived. Inside was an essay by Alfred Russel Wallace, a young, adventurous naturalist working in the Malay archipelago. Wallace had come to the same startling conclusion Darwin had been refining for over 20 years. That species evolved through natural selection. Darwin was stunned. His life's work, the idea he had guarded so carefully, now lived in someone else's hands, too. And Wallace, unaware of Darwin's long labor, was preparing to publish. Darwin's friends, Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, urged him to act. They arranged a joint presentation of both men's findings at the Linnean Society in London in July 1858. It was a quiet event. Few attendees grasped its importance, but Darwin knew what it meant. His time had come. He began writing feverishly, condensing decades of thought into a single, accessible book. He worked not with flair, but with clarity. Always careful, always methodical. He did not claim to overthrow faith. He only asked readers to look at nature and to follow the evidence. On November 24, 1859, his book was published on the origin of species by means of natural selection. It was not an attack, it was a revelation. The book opened with simple observations, variations among domestic animals, the role of selective breeding. Then it expanded outward, revealing a quiet, vast mechanism by which life changed generation by generation. There were no miracles, just time, pressure, advantage, adaptation. It was elegant and terrifying. The public reaction was swift and divided. Some hailed the book as genius. Others condemned it as heresy. Newspapers mocked it. Clergy denounced it. Scientists debated it. And the question began to ripple through Victorian society. If all life evolved by natural law, what did that mean for humanity? Darwin stayed mostly quiet. He avoided public debates. He let the storm swirl around him while he remained at Down House, writing, observing, thinking. He knew the controversy was only beginning, but he also knew that truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. The door was open, and the world, ready or not, had stepped into a new age of understanding. The publication of On the Origin of Species in 1859 sent quiet tremors through the foundations of society. Tremors that would soon become earthquakes across Europe and beyond. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection ignited intense debate. For scientists, it offered a unifying explanation for life's diversity. For theologians, it posed difficult questions. If species weren't fixed, what did that say about the story of creation, about humanity's place in the universe? Church leaders responded with sermons and pamphlets. Darwin was accused of reducing man to an animal, of robbing nature of divine purpose. His idea challenged not only religious doctrine, but Victorian pride. To some, the notion that humans were cousins of apes was unthinkable, even insulting. And yet within the scientific world, something remarkable was happening. Many began to accept it cautiously, sometimes reluctantly. Not because they liked it, but because it explained so much. Fossils, geography, anatomy, genetics, while not yet understood, would one day confirm what Darwin could only guess at. But through it all, Darwin remained still. He did not rush to defend himself in lecture halls. He left the fiery debates to others like Thomas Huxley, who earned the nickname Darwin's Bulldog for his fierce defense of evolution. Darwin's health, still fragile, kept him at home. But even in the quiet of Down House, he continued to work. He wrote book after book, expanding and deepening his ideas about orchids, barnacles, worms, and the expression of emotion in humans and animals. He explored how life wasn't just shaped by competition, but also by cooperation, by beauty, by behavior. He never claimed his theory answered every question. He was careful to admit what he did not know, and in private he wrestled with what he had unleashed. He worried about its implications. He knew it would disturb many, including his beloved wife, Emma. But he also believed that truth mattered, not truth shouted, not truth weaponized, but truth observed, measured, tested. Darwin didn't change the world with anger or revolution. He did it with quiet thought, patient work, and the courage to follow where the evidence led. By the 1860s, Charles Darwin had become one of the most recognized and controversial figures in science. But even as debates raged in pulpits and newspapers, Darwin remained steady. He was not a provocateur. He did not seek to tear down faith or provoke conflict. He simply continued to observe life slowly, carefully, and to write. Each of his books revealed a new piece of nature's puzzle. In the variation of animals and plants under domestication, he explored heredity years before genes were understood. In The Descent of Man, he addressed what many had feared to ask, applying his theory not just to birds and worms, but to humans themselves. There he stated clearly, "We are not separate from the natural world. We are part of it, formed by the same slow pressures, shaped by the same forces." But he also reminded readers that evolution didn't degrade humanity. It connected us to animals, to each other, to the earth. For some, this was inspiring. For others, deeply unsettling. Still, Darwin's voice remained calm, always focused on evidence, never on outrage. By now, his health confined him mostly to Down House. He took long, slow walks on a gravel path he called the Sandwalk, where he thought through ideas as he watched trees shift in the wind. He observed earthworms in his garden and how they enriched the soil. Even the smallest creatures, he realized, helped shape the world. Visitors came from around the world to speak with him. Many expected a firebrand. Instead, they met a quiet man with kind eyes, always curious, always humble. He corresponded constantly, hundreds of letters full of questions, encouragement, and thoughtful replies. He listened as much as he explained. In these final decades of his life, the world had begun to shift. Young scientists embraced his ideas. teachers introduced them in universities. Evolution was no longer a whisper. It had become a serious studied science. Darwin did not live to see all the pieces fall into place. He did not know about DNA, genetics, or the fossil discoveries yet to come. But he could sense the direction. The tide had turned, and the seeds he had planted were beginning to take root across continents, classrooms, and minds. In his final years, Charles Darwin remained the same man he had always been. Steady, curious, humble. He never stopped studying, never stopped thinking, and never stopped asking questions. He would rise each day at Downhouse, drink his tea, and walk the sandwalk path. His thinking path, often several times a day. He found comfort in rhythm, in solitude, and in nature's quiet language. The world outside may have debated and dissected his ideas, but within those garden walls, Darwin simply worked. He began to write about the humblest of creatures, earthworms. Many found it odd the great scientist now focused on worms. But to Darwin, there was no small in nature. In his book, The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms, he revealed how these unseen workers quietly reshaped the Earth's millimeter by millimeter. It was in many ways a reflection of his own method. Quiet, slow, persistent. His relationship with Emma remained deep and warm. They had weathered illness, grief, and the tension between belief and doubt. Though they differed in spiritual views, they shared love, respect, and a home filled with books, letters, and laughter from children and grandchildren. Darwin rarely spoke publicly, but his writings traveled further than he ever had. Across Europe, into the Americas, and beyond. His face appeared in caricatures and journals. School children began to learn his name. His books were translated, his ideas debated in distant languages, and yet he never saw himself as a hero or a rebel. He wrote plainly, never seeking grandeur. Even as his theories became the backbone of modern biology, Darwin often described himself as a slow thinker, someone who needed time, repetition, and careful thought. In April 1882, after years of fragile health, Charles Darwin quietly passed away at the age of 73. He was buried not in some remote grave, but in Westminster Abbey near Isaac Newton, among Britain's most honored minds. It was a rare tribute for a man once feared to have challenged the sacred. But history understood what many in his own time did not. He had not tried to destroy belief. He had tried to understand life, and he had succeeded more than he ever imagined. Today, more than a century after his death, Charles Darwin's legacy lives not only in museums or textbooks, but in the very fabric of how we understand the world. We see his fingerprints in every biology classroom, every DNA sequence, every fossil dig, every conservation effort. Evolution is no longer a theory on the margins. 'Tis the cornerstone of modern science. It shapes how we study disease, genetics, ecosystems, and even our place in the universe. And yet, Darwin's true legacy isn't just a scientific theory. It's a way of thinking, a method, a quiet courage to observe deeply, to question inherited truths, to gather evidence with care, and to sit with uncomfortable ideas until clarity forms. Darwin never claimed to know everything. In fact, he spent most of his life focused on what he didn't know. It taught us that doubt is not weakness. It is the starting point of discovery. That nature isn't static. It's in motion, changing, adapting, evolving. He also showed us that great change often begins in silence. That revolutionary ideas can come from gardens and journals, not just podiums and crowds. That you don't need to shout to shift the world. From the Galapagos finches to the humble earthworm, from On the Origin of Species to 1,000 quiet walks beneath English trees. Charles Darwin wove together a picture of life that still astonishes, still challenges, still invites wonder. He gave us a story not of chaos, but of connection. A story where every leaf, every feather, every fossil is a piece of something larger. a long, unbroken chain stretching across time. And in that chain, we too have a place. Not above nature, not outside it, but part of it, shaped by it, dependent on it, and capable like Darwin of understanding it. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let your thoughts drift not to noise or conflict, but to a man who once stared at a beetle with childlike curiosity, and from that spark helped illuminate the story of all living things. A quiet man with revolutionary thoughts who changed how we see life itself. All far from the cities of men, high on the southern slope of Mount Parnassus, there lies a place where stone meets sky and silence feels sacred. It is here, nestled above the valley of Phocis, that the ancient Greeks believed the voice of a god could be heard. Not in thunder or wind, but in the soft, trembling words of a woman. This was Delphi, the center of the world, they said. The Amphilos, the navel of the earth. Long before Apollo's golden temple stood there, the land was sacred to Gaia, the mother of all. Her sanctuary was guarded by a serpent named Python. But myth tells us that Apollo, young and radiant, came down from Olympus and slew the serpent with his bow. He claimed the site for himself and built a temple where the earth once whispered. From that moment forward, Delphi became the home of his oracle. But the god did not speak in his own voice. He chose a mouthpiece, a mortal woman called the Pythia. She was no queen, no scholar, no noble-born priestess. Often she came from the quiet countryside, chosen for her piety, not her power. And yet, when she entered the temple and sat above the sacred fissure, the world leaned in to hear her speak. From kings and emperors to farmers and wanderers, all came with questions. And the Pythia, seated on a bronze tripod, breathing in the vapors of the earth, would give them answers, not plainly, not gently, but in riddles. Her words came like dreams, strange, layered, full of truth and danger. One asked if he should go to war. She replied, "A great empire will fall." But whose empire? That he had to decide, and many guessed wrong. Another asked about wealth. She said, "He who seeks gold may find a tomb." Were her words prophecy or clever poetry? Were they divine insights or the genius of ambiguity? That mystery is part of her power. What cannot be explained is often most revered. And at Delhi, for over 1,000 years, one woman after another took the seat of the oracle and the world listened. Breath held as the gods spoke through human voice. To become the oracle of Delphi was not a path of ambition. It was a calling, quiet, sacred, and irreversible. The woman chosen as the Pythia was not draped in gold or worshipped as a goddess. She was respected, certainly, but her power was not her own. She was a vessel, a bridge between the human and the divine. And before she ever spoke a single word of prophecy, she underwent rituals that stripped away ego and identity. In the earliest days, the Pythia was a young virgin thought to be pure in the eyes of the gods, closer to spiritual truth. But one tale tells of a Thelian man who came seeking a prophecy, and upon seeing the young oracle abducted her. It was a warning, a fracture in the veil between mortal and divine. From then on, the role was reserved for older women, often widows drawn from simple village life, with no family or ambition to distract them from the god's voice. Once chosen, she lived apart from the world. She bathed in the sacred Castalian spring to cleanse herself both in body and spirit. She fasted, meditated, and dressed in plain white robes. There was no crown, no throne, just stillness. On the appointed days, usually the 7th of each month, Apollo's sacred number, she would enter the Adyton, the inner sanctum beneath the temple. There, the earth breathed through a narrow fissure in the rock, and the air was heavy with mystery. She sat on a 3-legged stool, a tripod directly above the chasm. Laurel leaves burned in a nearby brazier, and a bowl of holy water sat beside her. Some accounts say she chewed laurel or drank from the spring. Others describe the rising vapors, perhaps from volcanic gases, that induced her trance. And then something shifted. Her breath grew deep. Her posture changed. Her voice trembled, speaking in strange rhythms, disconnected from ordinary speech. Attendants, male priests called prophets, stood nearby to interpret her words, shaping them into answers for the waiting petitioners. But the message was hers alone. In that moment, the woman was gone. Only the oracle remained. From distant islands, across treacherous mountains, and through the dusty plains of the Mediterranean world, they came. Pilgrims, warriors, politicians, and poets, all seeking a glimpse of the future from the Oracle of Delhi. No one came casually. To consult the Pythia was a sacred act, one that required time, money, and reverence. Before approaching the temple, each visitor performed rituals of purification, bathing in the Castalian spring, offering sacrifices at Apollo's altar, and paying tribute to the sanctuary. Even then, not everyone could be heard. Only certain days were open for prophecy, and the waiting list could stretch for months. But for those who were granted an audience, the moment was profound. Kings came before launching wars. Generals sought assurance before crossing borders. City-states debated alliances, treaties, and laws based on her words. Even Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, was said to have visited. When asked if anyone was wiser than he, the oracle replied, "No one." Socrates, puzzled, spent his life testing the meaning of that answer. The Pythia rarely gave yes or no responses. Her utterances came in riddles, poetic, multi-layered, impossible to grasp fully in the moment. But that was the beauty of it. Her answers required reflection. They did not direct, they revealed. Chysus, the wealthy king of Lydia, famously asked whether he should attack the Persians. The oracle replied, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Encouraged, Chysus attacked and lost. It was his own empire that fell. Others were more cautious. The mysticals preparing to defend Athens against Persian invasion was told to trust in a wooden wall. Some believed it meant a literal wall. The mysticals believed it meant ships and built a navy. That navy would save Greece. The oracle offered no guarantees. Her power wasn't in clarity. It was in perspective. She gave glimpses of possibility, not certainty. And whether one triumphed or fell, they rarely blamed her because they hadn't simply asked a question. They had stepped into the sacred, into a conversation not just with Apollo, but with fate itself. The oracle of Delphi did not speak plainly. Her answers were cloaked in mystery, wrapped in riddles, poetic fragments, and veiled meanings that challenged the mind and stirred the soul. This was no accident. To the ancient Greeks, the future was not fixed. Fate had its threads, yes, but human choice still wove the pattern. The gods, it was believed, offered glimpses, not maps, and the oracle's riddles reflected this divine ambiguity. She might say, "The bull falls when the eagle flies," or "A crown will rust in the shadow of a mountain." To the seeker, these words could feel maddening. But to the wise, they were invitations to think, to reflect, to look beyond surface meanings. There was power in such language. A straight answer binds the future. A riddle leaves room. It opens the door without deciding what lies beyond. Priests and attendants, known as prophets, stood near the Pythia, interpreting her utterances into verse. Some say they shaped her words. Others believe they simply clarified what was already spoken. But either way, the riddles remained cryptic, symbolic, often unsettling. And yet, they were trusted. Why? Because they reflected life itself. Life, after all, rarely speaks in straight lines. Events unfold with irony, contradiction, and complexity. The oracle mirrored this truth, not through divine command, but through mirrored insight. Sometimes the riddle was the answer, and sometimes it revealed more about the questioner than the question. There were those who left Delphi confused, even angry, but more often visitors left in awe. Not because they understood, but because they had been seen. The oracle in her trance spoke something raw, something ancient. And, even when her words were misunderstood, they stayed with people, haunting them, guiding them, changing them. For over 1,000 years, her riddles echoed across Greece and beyond. They shaped empires, launched journeys, and gave voice to the invisible forces of destiny. And still today, long after her temple crumbled, her way of speaking remains mysterious, elusive, reflective, not telling us what to do, but reminding us to ask why we want to do it at all. For centuries, the power of the Oracle of Delhi was accepted without question. But beneath the temple, both literally and metaphorically, there were secrets, ones that modern minds have tried to unravel. What truly happened in that inner chamber? What caused the Thea's trance? Was it purely spiritual, or was there something else? Something physical, chemical, even geological? Ancient sources mention vapors, sweet-smelling gases rising from a chasm beneath the temple. The Pythia was said to inhale them before entering her altered state. For a long time, scholars dismissed this as myth. They believed there was no chasm, no gas, no scientific explanation, only theater and ritual. But then, the Earth began to speak again. In the 1990s, geologists studying the ruins discovered that the temple sat at the intersection of two fault lines. These faults released gases from underground, including ethylene, a compound known to cause mild euphoria, altered consciousness, and even hallucinations in high doses. The ancient stories, it turned out, may have been more than symbolic. The sanctuary's natural setting, the gentle tremble of the earth, the scent of strange gases, the echoing silence of the chamber likely contributed to the Pythias's trance. She wasn't pretending. She was entering a real altered state shaped by both the spirit and the earth itself. But that doesn't make her any less remarkable. The trance, the riddles, the wisdom, they were not accidents of geology. They were part of a tradition, a spiritual language shaped by centuries of reverence, ritual, and human experience. The Pythia trained her body and mind. She fasted, prayed, purified herself. She didn't just breathe the earth. She listened to it, and around her a network of priests and attendants preserved the temple's sanctity, maintained its rituals, and ensured that the mystery endured. Whether they fully understood the gases or not, they protected the illusion, or perhaps the reality, that this place was a doorway between worlds. So when we ask whether the oracle's power was real, the answer may lie beneath both stone and symbol, not in choosing between science and spirit, but in recognizing how deeply they can intertwine. While the Oracle of Delhi was draped in the language of the divine, her influence extended far beyond the temple's marble columns. She did not merely guide the faithful. She shaped the fate of city-states, influenced political alliances, and whispered into the very heartbeat of ancient power. Delhi was sacred ground, yes, but it was also strategic. Nestled between rival regions, it became a neutral sanctuary where politics and prophecy could coexist. Leaders did not just come to seek truth, they came to seek advantage. And the oracle, knowingly or not, gave them both. The priests who served alongside the Pythia were not oblivious to politics. They knew the stakes of a king's question, the weight of a general's request. And while the Pythia spoke in trance, it's likely that the questions were carefully managed. The audience meticulously curated and the interpretations subtly shaped. There were times when the oracle's messages aligned closely with the interests of Delhi itself, protecting its independence, favoring its allies, or maintaining its delicate status among powerful neighbors. Some historians suggest that at times the oracle's ambiguity was no accident. It was a diplomatic tool. In a world where open opinion could spark war, a veiled riddle could preserve peace. Consider the city-state of Sparta. The Spartans consulted the oracle before nearly every major decision, and often the answers affirmed their path. Was it divine approval or an understanding that a strong Sparta meant stability? Even the great Persian invasion of Greece was foretold at Delphi. When Athenians asked the oracle what to do, she warned them their city would fall. But with further pleading, she gave a second prophecy, telling them to trust in a wooden wall. That phrase, interpreted as a fleet of ships, led to the naval victory at Salamis and the salvation of Greece. Was it Apollo's wisdom or the careful foresight of people who understood both heaven and earth? Either way, the oracle endured because she adapted. Her riddles floated between the divine and the diplomatic, the sacred and the strategic. And through it all, people kept listening, not just for truth, but for advantage delivered in verse. For more than 1,000 years, the oracle of Delphi guided kings and commoners alike. But no voice, no matter how divine, echoes forever. The decline of the oracle did not come all at once. It came in shadows, slow creeping changes that dimmed the light of Delhi century by century. First came the weakening of Greek city-states. As Athens, Sparta, and Thebes rose and fell, so too did the flow of wealth and offerings to the sanctuary. Delphi had once been adorned with treasuries filled with gold, ivory, and gifts from across the known world. These tributes funded the temple, the priesthood, and the sacred games held in Apollo's honor. But wars changed everything. The rise of Rome brought a new rhythm to the region, one that honored its gods, not Apollo. Although early Roman leaders still respected the oracle and even consulted her, the political center of gravity shifted westward. Rome was pragmatic, its empire vast, and Delhi, once the Nivelle of the earth, began to feel peripheral. By the 2 North century AD, fewer visitors came. The rituals continued, but the crowds thinned. The Pythia's voice, once heard by empires, now echoed in a quieter chamber. And then came the final blow. In the 4th century, the Roman Empire embraced Christianity. With Emperor Theodosius II, pagan temples were shut and ancient rituals were outlawed. The oracle, a symbol of the old gods, could no longer speak. Apollo's voice, once carried through the breath of a mortal woman, was silenced by decree. The temple crumbled, the statues fell, and the sacred spring flowed unnoticed. No longer a place of prophecy, Delphi faded into ruin. The mountains remained, the stones remained, but the people were gone. What had once been the meeting point of gods and mortals became a quiet memory, one covered in earth and forgotten by time. But not entirely, because memory lives in stories, and the oracle's riddles, the myths of her visions, the awe she inspired. Those things endured past from scroll to whisper, from scholar to poet. And though her temple fell to silence, the question of what she truly was still lingers unanswered. Though the oracle's voice fell silent, her influence never vanished. Long after her temple crumbled, the idea of the Pythia, the woman who spoke for the gods, lingered in the imagination of poets, philosophers, and seekers of truth. Her riddles may have faded from the stone walls of Delphi, but they found new homes in books, in classrooms, and in the minds of those still drawn to mystery. The ancients had believed she channeled Apollo, but to later generations she became something more symbolic, a metaphor for human insight, for intuition, for the thin space between knowledge and wonder. In the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered the texts of Greece and Rome, scholars once again read of the oracle's power. Artists painted her in golden robes, surrounded by fire and smoke. Thinkers admired her restraint, the way she did not claim to command the future, only to glimpse its shadow. And even in the age of science, when myth was replaced by method, the oracle remained relevant. Scientists and historians, curious about the true source of her trances, examined Delphi's geography, searched for gas emissions, and pieced together the rituals of the past. Their findings only deepened the story. It turned out the ancient descriptions weren't all fantasy. Delhi did sit upon a fault line. Sweet-smelling gases may have risen from underground. Her trances may have had a geological cause. But rather than disproving the mystery, this revelation made it feel more profound. The earth itself, perhaps, had spoken through her. In modern literature and psychology, too, the oracle became a symbol, not just of prediction, but of introspection. Carl Jung saw prophecy as a reflection of the unconscious mind. The Pythia, he believed, didn't reveal fate. She revealed the hidden self. And so her legend endured, not because she foretold the future, but because she helped people ask the right questions. Today, tourists walk among the stones of Delhi. The temple is gone. The spring still flows, and the mountain wind still hums softly through the ruins. Some say, if you close your eyes, you can still hear her. Not words, perhaps, just a presence, a reminder that truth does not always shout. Sometimes it speaks in riddles. For all her fame, for all the lives she shaped, the question still lingers like mist over Mount Parnassus. Was the Oracle of Delhi truly touched by the divine? Or was she part of a carefully crafted illusion? A kind of ancient theater that used mystery, ritual, and psychology to create the appearance of prophecy. It's a question that has fascinated scholars for centuries. On one hand, there's the sacred setting, the temple perched on cliffs, the sounds of nature, the incense, the hush of the waiting crowd. Add to that the psychological weight of being in the presence of something revered across the ancient world. And even the most skeptical visitor might have felt a shiver of awe. And then there's the trance itself. Was it real? Hallucinogenic gases, as we've explored, may have altered the oracle's state of mind. But the rituals, the fasting, the isolation, the preparation could have created their own kind of altered consciousness. When the mind expects the divine, it often finds it. But to dismiss the oracle as mere theater would be to ignore something deeper. Her words changed lives not because they were precise, but because they demanded thought. They forced kings to reflect, citizens to interpret, and philosophers to question. She didn't offer commands. She offered puzzles. And in solving those puzzles, people often found their own answers. Was that manipulation or wisdom? Perhaps the oracle's power lay not in knowing the future, but in helping others confront their own choices. She did not predict. She revealed through language that reflected the world's complexity. Even now, we turn to figures who echo her voice. Therapists, philosophers, poets, and thinkers who help us navigate uncertainty. We don't ask them for facts. We ask them for meaning. In that way, the oracle never truly vanished. She lives on, not in marble ruins, but in every moment we pause and listen to the quiet space between question and answer, between fear and understanding. And maybe that is the greatest mystery of all. Not whether her prophecies were real, but why we still long to hear them. It begins with a quiet rhythm, the sound of sandals on stone, the soft clink of iron-shod wheels, the murmur of marching feet stretching into the horizon. This was the music of empire. The Roman roads were more than just a means of travel. They were arteries through which power, order, and civilization pulsed, stretching across mountains, plains, deserts, and rivers. They connected the vastness of Rome's territories with a kind of confidence that defied nature. From the moment Rome outgrew its local hills and villages, it needed roads. Not dusty tracks, but real, enduring structures. With each new conquest came the need to move legions swiftly, to send messages across provinces to allow goods and ideas to flow. So they built relentlessly. By the height of the empire, Rome had laid down over 400,000 kilometers of roads, 80,000 of them paved. A staggering achievement, especially for an ancient world without modern machinery. These roads connected lands as far as Britannia to the west and Syria to the east. They laced through Gaul, snaked over the Alps, skirted the Nile, and cut through the forests of Germania. And it all began with a simple principle. A road must serve the state, but it served more than legions. Along these roads came traders with amphorae of olive oil, scholars bearing scrolls of Greek philosophy, and families moving in ox-drawn carts. Priests walked to distant temples. Slaves were marched toward new markets. Information traveled faster than ever before. A message from Rome could reach the edge of the empire in mere days. The roads were marked with milestones every 1,000 paces, engraved with the names of emperors and the distances to Rome. The Caput Mundi, the head of the world. They weren't just signs, they were reminders. Wherever you stood in Rome's shadow. Even the phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't a metaphor. It was a fact. At the empire's center was the Millennium Aureum, the golden milestone from which all distances were measured. Like a great wheel, the empire's spokes reached outward, not in chaos, but in purpose. Under every sandal print lay a story, and under every stone the echo of empire. The strength of Rome was not only in its legions, but in the roads those legions marched upon. To the Romans, building a road was not a matter of convenience. It was a strategy, a statement, a legacy etched into the land. Each road began with precision. Surveyors known as agrimensores used simple yet effective tools, the groma, the chorobates, to measure straight lines, angles, and elevation. The Romans didn't just follow the land, they challenged it. Hills were cut through, valleys were filled. If a river blocked the path, they built a bridge. If a marsh stood in their way, they drained it or raised a causeway. Once a path was planned, the real labor began. First, a deep trench was dug, often over a meter deep. This became the fosser, the foundation. Large stones were laid at the bottom to provide strength. On top of that came layers of gravel, crushed rock, and lime mortar, each compressed with care. The final layer was some dorsum paving stones, flat and tightly fitted, often made of basalt or other durable rock. These roads weren't just flat. They were slightly crowned in the center and sloped at the edges to allow water to run off. Ditches were carved along the sides and drainage channels ensured that the road would not erode or flood. It was overbuilding by modern standards. But the Romans weren't building for a generation. They were building for eternity. The work was often carried out by soldiers, especially in newly conquered regions. Road building wasn't punishment. It was part of the discipline of Rome. A legion that could build a road could also build a fort, a bridge, a siege machine. Engineering was part of Roman identity, and mile after mile, the network expanded. With each stone laid, Rome extended its reach, not just militarily, but culturally. Roads brought Latin to the provinces. They brought Roman law, Roman trade, Roman customs. They were the threads in the empire's great tapestry. Even today, in parts of Europe and North Africa, Roman roads remain visible beneath modern highways. Their stones worn, but intact, unbroken, unbent, still holding the weight of history. Of all the roads that stretched from the heart of Rome, one was revered above the rest: the Via Appia, or the Iron Way. Its story begins in 312 BCE, when I.S. Claudius Caecus, a Roman censor, commissioned a direct route from Rome to Capua in southern Italy. It was a bold idea. No one had yet dared to cut such a path through the landscape. But Aius was not known for caution. He was known for vision, and the road that bore his name would become one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world. The Via was built for speed, for military necessity, but it became so much more. Over time, it extended all the way to Brundisium, a key port facing Greece. From there, ships carried Romans across the Adriatic toward the eastern provinces, toward trade, and toward conquest. What made the Iron Way extraordinary was not just its reach, but its durability. It was straight, firm, and designed to endure centuries. The surface was paved with large interlocking stones, so tight that the wheels of carts barely left a trace. Even in rain, the road shed water quickly, allowing travel to continue. But it wasn't just a road, it was a corridor of memory. Lining the Via Appia were tombs, mausoleums, and monuments. Reminders that even in death, Romans wanted to lie near the lifeblood of the empire. To be buried along the Iron Way was to remain close to history, to movement, to Rome itself. Famous events echoed along its length. Spartacus and his followers were crucified along the Via after their failed revolt. Their bodies stretched for miles. a grim warning to all who dared challenge Rome. Centuries later, early Christians would walk the same road to catacombs and hidden worship, carving a different kind of memory into the stones. Today, the Ian Way still survives. Parts of it preserved near Rome, quiet under the cypress trees. You can walk where legions marched, where traders bartered, where poets dreamed. It is not just a road, it is a story made of stone. Still leading forward, still speaking of the empire that dared to build forever. Every Roman road carried two truths, one in armor, the other in olive branches. On one hand, they were weapons. Built with military precision, Roman roads allowed legions to march with speed and purpose. In times of war, soldiers could travel 20 meters a day, crossing provinces in weeks instead of months. Reinforcements could arrive swiftly. Rebels could be crushed before they gained strength. Roads made the Roman army not only powerful, but present everywhere. But once the fighting ended, the roads remained, and with them came peace. Merchants followed the soldiers, their carts filled with pottery, wine, spices, and grain. Traders moved between towns. Caesarians and laborers traveled to where their skills were needed. These roads became veins not only of iron and discipline, but of silk, oil, and silver. They were also paths for ideas. Languages spread. Religious beliefs moved. Roman law and customs took root in distant corners of the empire. Where once there had been scattered tribes, the roads stitched together something new. A connected, Romanized world. Along the roads, posting stations were established called mutation for changing horses and mansions for rest and lodging. Official couriers known as the cursus public used these stations to carry messages, scrolls, and imperial commands at remarkable speeds. Messages could travel from Rome to the edge of Gaul in days. A network of information faster than the world would see again for centuries. But the roads weren't just for the empire's needs. Ordinary people used them too. Pilgrims journeyed to sacred sites. Families moved to new towns. Retired soldiers resettled in colonies across the empire. The roads became part of daily life. Dusty, worn, but trusted. And with each footfall, the Roman world became smaller. A man in Britannia could follow a road that would one day reach Jerusalem. A grain shipment from Egypt could be carted inland to Gaul. The roads ignored geography, culture, and language. They created something larger than tribe or town. They created belonging. War may have carved them, but peace is what filled them. As Rome expanded beyond Italy, the roads followed, or rather led the way. Each newly conquered province needed more than governors and taxes. It needed connection, unity. Roads became the threads that wove the distant parts of the empire into a single beating system. In Gaul, roads cut through forests and hills, linking tribes that had once warred with one another. In Britannia, the Romans laid stone across wetlands and moors, building straight through rugged land. In Hispania, roads climbed sun-drenched ridges connecting mines, garrisons, and coastal cities. In North Africa, the roads hugged the edge of the desert, supplying outposts and fortresses that stood as sentinels against chaos. In the east, roads extended into Asia Minor, Syria, and down toward Judea and Egypt. Ancient lands older than Rome itself, now laced with Roman stone. Every province had its own voice, its own customs. But with roads came a shared rhythm, a Roman cadence. Taxes flowed more easily. Troops moved quickly, and trade flourished. Olive oil from Hispania, glassware from Syria, papyrus from Egypt, wine from Gaul, all passed along the same arteries. These roads weren't just strategic, they were symbolic. They told the provinces, you are part of something greater. Along them, cities grew. Not just Roman military camps, but vibrant civilian centers. Towns like Londinium, Lugdunum, and Carthagon Nova expanded around crossroads where goods changed hands and cultures met. Forums were built, temples rose, Latin was spoken. And at the center of it all stood Rome, not just as a capital, but as a gravitational force. Even rebellions had to reckon with the roads. They allowed Rome to crush resistance swiftly, but they also allowed ideas of freedom and resistance to spread. Roads were neutral. They served whomever had the power to use them. Over time, the provinces stopped feeling like distant lands. They became extensions of the empire's body, tied to Rome by stone, sweat, and intention. From the cold hills of Colonia to the palm streets of Alexandria, the roads whispered the same message: "You are Rome now." And the land listened every day across the length and breadths of the Roman world. Feet touched stone. Sandals, hooves, wheels, and bare soles all moving forward, guided by the logic of Roman roads. The roads were alive, not with ceremony, but with motion. At sunrise, soldiers might be seen on the march, moving with discipline and armor glinting in the light. Behind them, merchants guided mule-drawn carts filled with jars of wine, bolts of wool, and crates of olives. Elsewhere, scribes and imperial couriers sped past, riding fast horses between relay stations, their bags packed with sealed scrolls meant for distant governors. And among them walked pilgrims, some seeking the blessing of a god, others carrying small offerings to a temple hundreds of miles away. They were joined by entertainers, fortune-tellers, and vagabonds, all chasing opportunity in the shadow of empire. Not all who traveled the roads were free. Slaves were marched across provinces in silent columns, heading to ports or markets. Prisoners, chained and weary, walked alongside their conquerors. The roads did not judge. They simply bore the weight of every story. There were inns along the way known as mansions or corp, offering bread, wine, and a place to rest. Travelers gathered there, trading news, gossip, and sometimes lies. Maps were rare, so roads were remembered through stories. A bend here, a sacred grove there, a shrine where the road forks. The Roman world was multilingual, multicultural. On any given road, you might hear Latin, Greek, Punic, Gaulish, Egyptian. Voices blending like the footsteps themselves, and the roads remembered them all. Even the rhythms of time followed the roads. Festivals, markets, and campaigns were scheduled around travel times. The empire ran on a calendar shaped by stone and distance. For many, the road was not just a way from place to place. It was life. It was movement. It was promise. A traveler might leave home and return years later, aged and wiser, carrying stories from lands they'd never imagined. And under it all, the stones stayed firm, silent observers to the hopes, fears, and footsteps of a world always in motion. Even the strongest roads must one day feel the weight of time. As the centuries passed, the unity of Rome began to unravel. The empire that had stretched from Britain to the sands of Arabia grew too vast, too fractured, too burdened by its own weight. And though the roads remained, the silence that began to fall across them told a different story. Trade slowed. Garrisons were abandoned. Frontier towns grew quiet. The once busy cursus publicis, Rome's official postal service, faltered as provinces broke away. Governors declared independence and barbarians pressed at the borders. The roads, still solid beneath the dust, no longer heard the steady rhythm of legionnaires. Instead, they heard the disorganized shuffle of retreating soldiers, refugees, and raiders. Rome no longer sent reinforcements. It sent whispers. Too little, too late. Invasions came from the north, the east, the sea. Vandals crossed the Alps. Goths marched across Italy. And in the east, new empires stirred. They used the Roman roads, yes, but not in the name of Rome. Without maintenance, the roads began to crack. Bridges collapsed, milestones crumbled, and sections were swallowed by forests and swamps. Some parts remained in use, especially near surviving cities. But the grand vision of a unified network pulsing with imperial life faded into memory. And yet, even in their decay, the roads endured. In the countryside, farmers used their stones to build walls and homes. In medieval times, travelers still followed their outlines, tracing ancient paths between villages and monasteries. Some roads were repaved and renamed by kingdoms that rose from Rome's ashes. Others simply slept, buried beneath fields, waiting to be rediscovered. What Rome had built was too deeply rooted to fully vanish, and so the legacy shifted. The roads no longer served an empire. They became its ghost. Not in despair, but in quiet resilience, a reminder of what had been and what still lingered beneath the soil. Every worn stone, every half-buried milestone was a voice from the past whispering, "Here we marched, here we ruled, here we dreamed." And though the empire fell, the roads remembered. Long after the Roman Empire faded into legend, its roads continued their quiet work, not in grandeur, but in influence. Many of the routes laid down by Roman surveyors over 2,000 years ago still shape the paths we take today. Beneath highways, beneath cobbled city streets, even beneath modern train lines, Roman foundations remain. In cities like Paris, London, Cologne, and Barcelona, the oldest quarters are often built directly on Roman road grids. Follow certain highways across Europe, and you re-still walking in Roman footsteps, whether you know it or not. The logic of Roman engineering was so sound, so deliberate, that it became difficult to forget. Where they built, people followed. Where they turned, future generations turned. And where they connected, new cities rose. Even our modern maps reflect their decisions. Their roads set the pattern not only for travel, but for empire, for commerce, for civilization itself. Archaeologists today still uncover buried segments of these roads, some just inches beneath the surface. Their stones worn smooth by time, still fitted tightly together. They often lie near Roman bridges, aqueducts, and milestones, weathered but stubborn, refusing to disappear. In rural places, farmers still plow around ancient curves. In cities, construction crews often find Roman paving stones beneath asphalt. The old bones of empire beneath the skin of the modern world. Historians have studied Roman roads not just for their durability, but for what they reveal. The mind of a civilization obsessed with connection, order, and permanence. Roads weren't just for movement, they were for memory. And in that memory, Rome lives on. When we drive across a continent, when we walk a straight line through a city center, when we take for granted that one place will lead to another, we are echoing a Roman idea that roads are not only paths between places. They are promises of return, of reach, of the possibility that the world, however vast, can be understood if we only follow the stone. The Roman roads were more than engineering triumphs. They were acts of faith. Faith in the permanence of empire, in the order of the world, and in the power of direction. And though Rome itself is long gone, its roads continue to shape how we think about movement, connection, and civilization. They remind us that what we build today can outlast us, not only in stone and mortar, but in influence. In every straight road through a countryside, in every milestone uncovered beneath a modern sidewalk, there echoes a mindset, practical, purposeful, and profoundly human. Rome's roads did not simply move people, they moved ideas. Through them came law, language, religion, architecture. Christianity spread along these roads, as did imperial decrees, cultural customs, and even rebellion. The road was never neutral. It carried what the traveler brought, good and bad, light and shadow. And now they belong to no empire. They are scattered ruins, open paths, gentle reminders hidden in the folds of Europe and beyond. Tourists walk their length. Locals drive modern cars over ancient routes. Historians trace them with care. They are not forgotten. They are absorbed. Still part of the living world. Even today, when we say all roads lead to Rome, we mean more than geography. We mean influence. We mean reach. We mean that the world, vast and chaotic as it may seem, is still bound together by paths someone dared to lay. And perhaps that's the truest lesson the Roman roads leave behind. that great civilizations are not remembered only for their conquests or their collapse, but for the things they quietly leave beneath our feet, the roads that endure, the stones that remain, the maps we still draw upon. In the hush of the countryside, where a stretch of ancient paving lies half buried in grass, you can still pause and hear it. The echo of sandals, the rattle of wheels, the hum of 1,000 forgotten voices headed somewhere, always forward. The Roman roads may no longer conquer the world, but they still connect it.